And I do think that a lot of entrepreneurs, they do this, of course, because they want to make money, but they also do it because they are excited about finding ways of solving problems. And so I would hope that AI can kind of reinvent what entrepreneurship is so that we can have the unicorns, that's fine. But these 60% of Americans who say they'd like to start something, the reality is that only 8% does.
Yo, it's the future, don't hit the snooze. AI is here giving humans the boost. Team Humans rolling, brains in the game with Dan Turchin. Y'all remember the name. People reign in the mix, no stopping the flow. Better work, better life, yeah, we're ready to go. Robots and humans, a collab, you know. Okay, let's start the show.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work, episode 370. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for HR and IT employee service. Our community is growing. Thank you for being a loyal member of it. If you haven't yet subscribed to our newsletter, it comes out weekly. It includes some fun facts and clips from the main episodes that don't always make it into the weekly show. You can subscribe in the link in the show notes. Please join us there. We are all in this together, one big global society. If you enjoyed today's episode or any other, share it with just one friend. They'll know you care about using AI to make humans better. And you know what? If someone you know shared this one with you, tell them thanks and pay it forward. If you leave a comment, I may share it in an upcoming episode, like this one from Lisa in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who's an entrepreneur. Lisa's favorite episode is number 294 with Bernard Marr, author and futurist, on how to use generative AI to get ahead in your career. That was a great one. We'll share the link to that one in the show notes. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly, and of course, the added bonus, you get one AI fun fact. Here it is for today. Chase Feliciantonino writes in Politico about California's first in the nation AI safety law, which was recently signed by Governor Gavin Newsom. The law sets the groundwork for a potential national standard. Newsom vetoed a broader measure last year that set off an international debate. The measure requires some AI developers to publicly disclose their safety and security protocols. It also creates a way for companies and the public to report major safety incidents to the state. Meanwhile, in Congress in the United States, Republican Senator Ted Cruz has spearheaded an effort to freeze state AI legislation, vowing to revive the effort after it initially failed to make it into the mega bill passed over the summer. Other members of Congress have separately discussed crafting a national AI safety framework. Major AI vendors like OpenAI, Meta, and Anthropic have endorsed the bill. High-profile investors like Andreessen Horowitz endorsed parts, while warning that regulating how the technology is developed risks squeezing out startups and slowing innovation. Of course, we'll link to the full article in today's show notes. My commentary: sadly, the issue of AI safety has become politicized. Federal, state, and global leaders have an obligation to rise above re-election interests and partisan agendas and agree that AI guardrails aren't optional. AI is an opportunity for every human to have access to education, medical treatment, and cures for diseases. We can use AI to end famine and resolve international disputes without loss of human life. We can't regulate AI at the glacial speed of government policy. We can use this important time to remind legislators that they work for us, and their job is to protect and preserve the lives of citizens while promoting civil discourse. Let's hold them accountable and also not wait for them to act responsibly. Now, shifting to this week's great conversation. Henrik Werdelin is an accomplished founder, investor, and author with over 15 years at the forefront of entrepreneurship. Best known as the co-founder of Bark, a New York Stock Exchange-listed company for dogs and dog parents. He also co-founded Prehype, the startup studio behind ventures like & Ro and Audos. Henrik co-hosts the amazing podcast Beyond the Prompt with Stanford's Jeremy Utley, and he's the co-author of Me, My Customer, and AI, which explores how AI reshapes the entrepreneurial landscape. Henrik was an entrepreneur in residence at Index Ventures and head of product development at MTB International. He's been recognized by Fast Company as one of the top 100 most creative people in business and by Business Insider's Silicon Alley 100. Without further ado, Henrik, I've been looking forward to this one. It's my pleasure to welcome you to AI and the Future of Work. Let's get started by having you share a bit more about that illustrious background and how you get into the space.
It always sounds very good when it kind of read aloud like that, right? So I'll take the imposter syndrome in the pocket for a second. I mean, like when it comes to AI, I think I kind of stumbled into it in 2020. I had a friend who was an artist, and he'd been talking about it and showed it to me back when it was kind of like I think they call it the playground. It was just like a text box, and I tried it, and you just basically put in like a line, and then you could press submit, and it would just continue whatever you had kind of written. And it was honestly completely magical. I'm old enough to remember kind of like the pre-internet days, and I remember first time telnetting into a computer, and I remember first time opening the Mosaic browser and seeing kind of like the first very basic HTML. And I think back then I was like, wow, like this is going to change a lot. And I kind of like almost got like these kind of like glimpse of things that would happen. And I had the same thing when I tried OpenAI the first time. I was like, okay, this is going to change everything. So I got smitten quite fast, and has been kind of like, yeah, pretty obsessed about how do I take workflows, how do I atomize them, and how do I create autonomous kind of agents that could help me do the stuff I do better since.
The reason I wanted you on the podcast is because you published Me, My Customer, and AI, which humanizes a lot of these things that can seem a little bit heady, a little bit academic, sometimes a little bit dystopian. But you have a different take on the future of AI and specifically with respect to entrepreneurship. Talk us through the thesis of the book.
Yeah, I think, I mean, like, I'm not naive, so I understand and sympathize with a lot of the concerns that are raised, and so I don't want to dismiss any of them. I do believe that the best way to predict the future is to make it, and I think with that comes the kind of like obligation of trying to build something that is better for the world. And so I'll probably have like I'll present a little bit more my positive, rosy version of what can happen. But I think that's important to show that also, because otherwise we just get consumed with worry. Um, there is, I look at kind of technology in the lens of entrepreneurship because that's kind of my world. And so most things that happen over the last 10, 15 years, I almost look at like when did they start to contribute to kind of like entrepreneurial technologies. And it starts really with kind of like the whole kind of getting access to the internet becoming easier. Then it becomes easier to host stuff with the cloud. I mean, like my first purchase when I did my first startup was a $5,000 Windows NT server, right? Which because you had to and then you had to find somebody to connect to the internet, and then obviously the cloud came around, and then you had to we did BarkBox, we had to do all this kind of complicated subscription software until like SaaS came around, and then Recurly was a partner at the time, kind of like solved that. And so I think AI is really the final step, and we write about that in the book of there's all these things that normally made it difficult for the 60% of Americans who say they'd like to start something. And now I think all that is becoming much easier. So what the book explores is both this kind of new paradigm, which means that I think it could be this golden age for what we think of everyday entrepreneurs. And then the paradox that when everybody can make everything, how do you kind of stand out? And what we argue in the book is that the new moat is what we think of as relationship capital. It's basically the strength between the customer and the founder, and vice versa. And so we explore kind of like those two spaces, both kind of like the democratization of entrepreneurship, and then also how do you really establish this relationship capital?
So you were doing your research for the book over the past several years. The world is changing at kind of hourly or daily speed. Uh, what's maybe the chapter, or what would you add to the book if you were writing it from scratch today?
I mean, like the problem with writing a book is that every time you're done with a book, I've done two, you kind of want to rewrite it because like now you kind of finally get your thinking around it. I have a bunch of different things that I'm intrigued about now post writing the book. I think one of them is about actually how as the more that I understand about AI, the more I understand how little we understand about humanity. And for us to become really good of using AI as an Iron Man suit, we need to become really good of understanding what we want, how we take all these different things like questions that the computer can't answer to us right now are things like the mood is weird in the office, or the party is just getting started. And these are kind of like soft data elements, which I'm not even sure we understand why we understand. And without us understanding those elements better, I think it's complicated for us to become really good of using AI as efficient as we should do. So that space I find to be very interesting. The second thing, which is, like probably like a few steps away, is I think I was part of the kind of the world that helped create the social web. And so I remember the early days of the Facebooks, of the Twitters, and hanging out with the people that built those platforms. And there was not like, this was not evil people. These were people that truly just got excited about social engineering and using tools like that and sharing kind of like a picture of whatever we ate and all those different banal things. Now, obviously, it had all these kind of side effects, a whole generation of young people having mental health issue because of the way that these systems were built. And they were not, I don't believe they were intended at all, because knowing the people that built them, they were not mean-spirited people. And so I'm kind of like thoughtful as what are some of the elements that we need to be cognitive about as we building these new systems. And one of the areas is this kind of like profound loneliness that I think is already kind of like coming into society. Maybe started with COVID, and so we don't physically see each other that much anymore. We're increasingly creating interfaces between us and other people, right? We don't wait for in the supermarket anymore because we get things delivered. We don't go in a bar anymore because we find partners on Tinder and what have you. And as I'm exploring and I'm myself working very, very kind of like working a lot with AI, I see that increasingly my conversations are kind of like turn into these conversations with the AI bots that I created. And so I don't necessarily now just call a friend and saying, hey, what do you think about this idea? I have that dialogue with ChatGPT. And so the areas that I'm interested in post the book, and I'm more sorry that this is a very long-winded answer, is basically this kind of this space on what do we need to be aware of to prevent ourselves to suddenly getting kind of like a negative effect on ourselves. How do we not become cognitive lazy because we just take the first thing that the bot gives back to us? How do we not become lonely because that we remember that sometimes it's okay to call a friend instead of just asking a chatbot about an idea? And those kind of areas, that's kind of like what's top of mind right now.
So the pro side of AI for entrepreneurship is that, as you indicated, it makes it so much easier to bootstrap a company. It's cheaper to build a company, iterate fast, help you write code, etc. But the downside of kind of AI, getting infused into every aspect of the company creation process is that it leads to the homogenization of ideas. And so if every entrepreneur is using the same tools to generate the same kind of bland copy or, iterate on their ideas, it's potential that we'll just have a proliferation of maybe, weak or, similar similar businesses that will proliferate. How do you coach entrepreneurs to kind of not over rely or get lazy because AI is so accessible?
Yeah, I don't think necessarily there's any good tools to achieve that specific thing yet. The way that the pedagogy of entrepreneurship that I've always been an advocate of is one that doesn't start with an idea, but it starts with a problem. And so in the book we read about this, it sucks that framework, which is basically kind of our way of making sure that the problem that you're trying to solve is meaningful. And so the two things I ask any entrepreneur for is like, who do you want to serve and what is the problem they have? And I think if you have those two components, you're kind of well on your way to have something that's unique. And then specifically, in this world, I think you also need to ask yourself, why do you have authenticity or an authority to kind of solve that problem for people? Sometimes people can come up with a great idea, but they shouldn't be doing it. And so what we think about in relationship capital is basically these three layers that I think that we need to become better of understanding and measure. And it's basically depth. So it's the intimacy layer. How well does a customer feel that you see them? Like, do they feel heard? And you can, for example, measure that with like how quickly do you answer their emails. Obviously, nothing shouts, I don't care about you, than not responding to something. The second thing is I think about density, which is how much do people feel that you're part of the community you're serving? Like you have a business that serve people, but you also kind of like have a podcast where you explore things that these people kind of like are interested in. And so I would imagine for many people, People Rain is kind of like not just, you know, a piece of software or solution, it's also something that's kind of like contribute to the community. There's obviously some businesses that's been very famous of doing that, the Patagonia of the world, the Peloton, where you put the logo on and it says something about yourself. And the last thing I think about is durability or the resilience layer. And that's a little bit new, but I believe that in the world of AI, products and services, half-life time will be shorter and shorter. And so you need to be very good of understanding the problems that your customers have and then create solutions for them. But you need to permit permission to do that. And some brands have permissions to do that and some do not. It's very easy for you to think of what a Nike hotel would look like. I'm sure you'll get like imagery of what that might be. But if I say, and by the way, Hilton is making a shoe, you wouldn't necessarily know. And so some brands and some businesses have permission, have that resilience layer, and some do not. And so those three layers is kind of like the core of this relationship capital, which I'm increasingly kind of like obsessing about because I think that will become kind of like one of the only moats that's going to be left in a world where everybody can make everything.
We're getting to know each other before we start recording, and beyond you making sure that I could not speak with a Danish accent, which you confirmed very quickly, and I confirmed that you can speak with a good twang. So you passed the test better than I did. You had said kind of, what works best for this audience, and I said storytelling that involves humanness. So I'm going to ask you a question about humanness, but because of your background, it's also going to be about dogness. I hope that's okay. So you had so much success, or have had so much success with Bark, and you mentioned the Bark box. If you had had all of today's kind of modern AI tools available to you when you were starting the company, first off, what would you have done differently? How would you, avail yourselves of those tools? But second, maybe back to the humanness part, which tools that you have access to might you have said, no, that's going to interfere with, the vision of, of the company?
I mean, like, I guess the most counterintuitive kind of like answer to that is we have something at Bark we call the Happy Team. And the Happy Team is led by a guy called Hanan, and it's our customer service team. But it's a little bit belittling the team that we call it a customer service team because I think a lot of people have like a two-dimensional view of what a customer service team is. It's like the people who answer angry emails and change people's passwords. For us, it's like, is it truly the core of the organization? And so I think while I today could probably create a lot of bots that could answer some of these things, and we have them too, so don't get me wrong. What I would be wary about and where we are doing a lot of time thinking is how do we balance that between not kind of like discounting the relationship we have with our customers? Because that is something that is earned, that is something that is difficult to earn, and it's something that you really deeply have to respect. And so I think I would have some technology, like, and we have like hundreds of people in our customer service team, and they sit there and they, the ones who talk to our customers, the ones who understand their problems, they're the ones who help us come up with new good ideas for things that we should launch. It's the ones who kind of like make sure that people don't get too upset with us when we do something wrong or the box get delayed or whatever kind of can happen in our world. And that I think is very tempting to just throw technology at, and I think that's probably flawed. And so I would rather use AI, for example, to make sure that a happy team member, when they get an email or chat or call for a person, very fast understand kind of like the whole profile of this person. So let's say their box is delayed, and that happened 3 years ago, then they know that and they don't kind of just run through a script, but they can go like, hey, I realized we had this issue before. This is how we fixed it last time. I don't think it's the same problem, but we're on it. Kind of like, so you feel seen. I think that's probably the one that stand out. Outside that, a lot of the things that we have built with Bark over the years, I think we could obviously have it accelerated with AI now. But we've always tried to be a very human brand. And there is this magical bond between dogs and their people. And I don't think technology truly understands that properly yet. And so I would be wary of just throwing technology at it too, because I would worry that that kind of like magic would disappear.
Yeah, I was curious if that was kind of where you go with that. Um, the concept behind Bark is simple. The execution was brilliant, and obviously your passion for the idea is what I'm going to go out on a limb and that has made you so successful. Um, when you think about the the success formula, take me back to that. It sucks that moment that led you to start the company.
Yeah, I mean, like that. The the origin of the company was, Matt Carley and I met each other, and Matt had a Great Dane in New York City, Hugo, and Hugo was difficult. It was difficult to find cool products, and so honestly, it wasn't a very kind of grand idea. It was like, let's make something, find some really cool products for Hugo. Um, and I think we realized pretty fast that what we could build was not just a stuff in a box business, but it was kind of, we saw it as like the Disney for dogs, that we could try to kind of approach the world in the same way. I don't want to compare us, but like the incredible Walt Disney kind of like suddenly saw that you could entertain kids and bring them into a universe. And in the same way, we were like, well, if we can create a little kind of Broadway theater show between you and your dog every month, if we can make sure that you and your dog can go traveling together and take our airline, or we can create something where treats are not just kind of all about being, healthy for you, but they're also a little bit like candy. It's like something where you do it because that you're kind of having a little moment of celebration together. We could reframe how the pet industry was seeing the relationship and the experience design they were creating in the moments where you're interacting with your dog. We could create something that was meaningful. I think honestly, when we started, we didn't think it would be a very big business. We wanted to make some cool stuff with some people we really liked, and we wanted to hang out with people who were as nuts and quirky as we were, and yeah, who loved dogs. And I think in many ways that DNA kind of like just created a moment in time that worked for us. So unfortunately, it wasn't necessarily brilliance. It was a lot of passion, and in many ways, like it wasn't too dissimilar. I felt I was at MTV for many years, and some of your listeners might be old enough to remember that was cool for a second. I think they just closed it down recently. But for a moment in time, that was kind of like a space where people who had music at heart could kind of come and watch and feel part of like a group of like-minded people. And it wasn't really about the utility of music. It wasn't about how do you play a guitar or how do you attend a concert. It was about having rock and roll at heart. And I think the same way when we were building the brand for Bark, we were like thinking the same way. How do we create something that's a lifestyle?
One of my theses for this podcast is I don't want the accessibility of AI to interfere with the entrepreneurial journey and being proud of that simple idea and changing the world with something that it's about ideas and passion and heart and commitment. If you were to be coaching the next Bark entrepreneur that has it sucks that kind of moment but might be tempted to abuse AI, how would you say new entrepreneurs should kind of navigate that boundary between where it should and shouldn't be used?
I mean, like, I think the balance between virality and morality is fine. Uh, you definitely have to come up with things where I wouldn't say you do legal arbitrage, but you're definitely kind of moving in spaces where the established players do not, because otherwise you just won't get the attention, right? And I think for Bark, we kind of grew up with Instagram, and we were lucky, Synthetic crazies, and it's like excited about like doing a lot of stuff on those platforms, and that benefited for us. I have a weird answer to this question. I read this book the other day called Why Greatness Can't Be Planned. It's by Kenneth Stanley. Used to be a professor in Miami, and then he built an algorithm, sold it to Uber, became head of AI for Uber, then went to OpenAI, and now he's somewhere else. And a very, very interesting person. He writes about how we get to AGI, and his thesis is that you can't plan how you get there. All great kind of like ideas and concepts come from these systems of open-endedness, as he calls them. And so he talks about AI, but I think it's kind of like, I think it's very applicable to entrepreneurship too. So he says the way you get to AGI is to pursue with great intensity interestingness, and then that becomes the stepping stones, and it will lead you somewhere. It might not be where you expected it to be, but it will lead you somewhere. And if you're lucky, that's going to be AGI. That's how I think about entrepreneurship. So I think you have to not necessarily set out as saying, I want to build $1 billion business. When I've done that, they tend to fail. When I set out and saying, I'm really interested in this space. I have these people that I find to be more talented than me in many ways. And we're going to approach this with values, but also just with like a lot of intensity, right? Like just like a lot of passion, like things that move you up, things that propel you, things that make you answer the emails on Sunday evenings. And then you kind of mix that, then sometimes you're lucky and something quite magical appear from it. But it's the outcome of something. It's not kind of like the purpose of it. And so I know it's like a highly philosophical approach, but like that's kind of like how I think about entrepreneurship. And I've seen other people do other things and it worked well for them. That this has been the path and the approach that's worked well for me.
So when we think about using more AI to build companies, it really comes down to a very simple principle. AI is there to make predictions. It's really a prediction engine. And extrapolate that out far enough, and it can make decisions, and you give it agency, and it'll go off and do tasks. We quickly get into this realm of not what it can do, but what it should do. When you're thinking about kind of new venture formation, how do you think about exercising AI responsibly? And kind of, I say frequently on the show, it's not about what could go right, but we have an obligation to think about what could go wrong. How would you coach entrepreneurs to kind of find the right guardrails so that there aren't inadvertently bad decisions that are being operationalized using AI?
I mean, like I operate from a first principles kind of point of view, and so I have my values, I have my systems, I have all these different things. I think when AI works well, it's when it creates basically something for you to edit so that you can be in edit mode as much as possible, because that just takes much less effort than sitting and staring at the empty page. I built this business called Audos, and we're trying to basically build hundreds of thousands of companies a year on this platform. And so we think a lot about like, how do you create systems for creation? And what I think the way that we try not to do evil is by offering up, you can create some guardrails, but really I think that's why it's so important to have the human in the loop. I'll give you a little backstory. When we started the journey at Autos, we had started Prehype, we had the studio, we'd built a bunch of big companies, and we were kind of like, things were going well for us, but we were doing like 5 companies a year. And then we got access to OpenAI, and we're like, hey, wait a minute, we can just have AI make the companies. And so we created systems that would slurp the internet for problems, basically frame them in suckstat statements. It would reframe them. It would create landing pages. It would drive traffic. And basically it would ping us when 100 people had signed up for something that we'd never even seen, because it was just based on kind of like the system. And it was crazy stuff that it came back with. Like it was people who wanted to buy a new microbiome by buying fecal transplant from Olympic athletes. CAC is low. A lot of people want to buy it. Now, it's illegal. You can't send fecal matter across state lines. It's probably not going to work. It's nasty because you're basically making poop pills, like it's all those different things, right? And so we spent a bunch of time just exploring that. We got convinced that you need a person as being the interface between a company and a customer. And that human in the loop is going to be important for a period of time. And so the long-winded answer to your question is, I think the way that you create the guardrails is that you make sure that the human in the loop is there to take decisions, not necessarily come up with stuff or produce the stuff, but being the one that says, I want this one and I want that one, and I definitely don't want these other things.
Good answer. And Henrik, we're now friends. I'm really glad that you didn't ask me to be the CMO of the company responsible for branding Olympic athletes' fecal matter. Thank you, my friend.
I mean, like, it's still, the other interesting, I met like a bio entrepreneur the other day, and I told him the story, and he was like, hey, wait a minute, I actually kind of think we could isolate these bacteria, and he sent me some papers but no, I'm not making poop pills, right?
It doesn't fit my "it sucks" that test. Well, one of the obvious highest profile drawbacks of AI is that every time we automate a task, we potentially, we eliminate an opportunity to infuse humanness into that task. So much of the human experience is doing things and trying and learning and growing. And as AI is more frequently relied upon to do the things that make us human, we risk losing some of what makes us human in the first place. How do you think about tasks being automated with AI, and how does that change our relationship with work and with life for that matter as well? Yeah, I would love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think we were talking about earlier, that is definitely something that we don't have a lot of mental models or frameworks to kind of like rely on. There's some tasks that I don't think necessarily requires that much effort, right? I booked a hotel yesterday for travel, and I put it in the new OpenAI browser and tested it out, and it did a fine job, and it saved me for 15 minutes of kind of clicking around. So don't think necessarily I needed humanness there. But I also then were brainstorming about, I was using Claude Code to kind of like create a new agent, and I got excited about it. What I noticed is that I don't go to Claude and going, oh, we just made an amazing agent together. I call one of my colleagues and I go, hey, you should see what I just did, right? Like I have this innate urge to kind of share that with a human. And so I think we will probably find out, and I think it'll be different for different individuals. Where is it that we feel that it's very important that we inject humanness? And where is it that we think that we can outsource that to a bot? Now, the reality is that a lot of humans also act in a very not human way, right? We have this, I always think of this like when you talk to like, what is the best practice, for example, letting somebody go from your company? Like, it's always like, basically take the computer, custom out the system, make sure they cannot talk to anybody. And you're like, yeah, but that's also like really like aggressive, unpleasant way of acting to people who are basically going through something that's pretty traumatic. So can we not do that? And so I think the humanness is something that we all probably need to kind of find out. How do we infuse more of that, not just in AI, but just in the world? Like, be kind to a little bit of people. Like I know, for example, my New Year's resolution is I refuse to be upset in traffic. I don't want to be the person who shouts something back at somebody who does something dumb, because that's just an energy that the world doesn't need, right? And so I think we could all do our own little bit, and I don't think it's an AI specific thing. I think it's a period of time. I think it's a responsibility. I think it's something that we all just kind of need to lean into a little bit more.
I love the way you describe that example of kind of ideating or using Claude Code as a tool. That the celebration was, look at what I created. It's my idea. And I had tools. When you build a bonfire, you have some wood and, and you strike a match, and you don't say, thank you, Prometheus, the god of fire. We created this fire together, right? I mean, you built the bonfire, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like that narrative is getting lost. And it just kind of me on a soapbox. But, anytime we give the AI pronouns, or we tell it has a birthday, or we do things that make it seem like anything other than a machine or a tool, I think we miss an opportunity, to celebrate that it's more humans in the process.
I think it's very interesting. We were talking the other day about naming. So at Audos, obviously, we also help people come up with names. And so you have like three big companies that have decided completely different approaches, right? You have OpenAI, has something ChatGPT is a very utilitarian name. You have Claude, that's human, and then you have Perplexity, that's a brand, right? And so I think even like in small things of like as we're building all these agentic businesses, I don't even think we have really know like the terminology of how we should name these things. And some of them might make sense to have a little bit more of a human name. And I think it's very human also to anthropomorphize like computers, and it's dumb. Look at what it's done, like, oh, this didn't do anything. It just reacted to that. Now, obviously, the more that this becomes a representation of the statistical answer that the web would give you, the more obviously, it will feel very human. But I think it goes back to then the point is that we don't know what human means. We don't know like what are the human traits that we value that we think are important. And I think that hopefully what AI will help us do is to become much better at articulating that so that we can become more of that ourselves.
I think the difference with LLMs is that we train them on language. And so it's easier to imbue them with sentience because they, quote, speak our language versus maybe a traditional machine learning model where it's just trained on abstract data.
But it's also
That's,
humbling, right? Because I think a lot of people go, "Oh, this LM model is not very smart," and you go like, "Well, a bunch of people are not very smart either, right?" Like, and there's, it is something that is, I think, like a wrapper, and that's why I think we're struggling because I think a lot of us first saw it just as another technology. We saw it as the internet, but it's probably more like electricity or the invention of language. It's like a new technology that is much more foundational than TCP/IP was, and so therefore we have to figure out what does that mean with society. What does it mean with organizational design? What does it mean with kind of like how we conduct our own business? Who we want to be, all those different things.
I agree 100%. That's really the way to make the best use of this important time is to have the conversation. Not take it on faith that it's human like or dot dot dot, but just have the conversation about what it means
I
to be a human.
And sorry to interrupt, but I think that agency is what is very important. We decide. Like we humans, we can make the world into something that we'd like to be. We can nudge it in the way that we'd like to be. And I think honestly, and maybe that's me just getting older, you have the responsibility to kind of nudge it in the right way. I mean, like this doesn't just happen. Like these things are it's people like you and me that sit down every day and make small decisions that kind of turns it in whatever direction.
That's all that will ever matter. That's we need more of that thoughtful approach. It is getting harder as the tools get better, but Henrik, this one flew by. We're bad at time, but I can't let you off the hot seat without answering one last important question for me. The pace of innovation it's so fast right now. It's hard to even fathom what the world of, let's say, the world of entrepreneurship looks like in a decade. But what do you think it'll be like to create a company in 10 years at the pace that we're going? What will be commonplace that today just seems like science fiction?
10 years is tough, right? Because it's far enough to be far enough out, but it's also kind of like, I'll take the positive spin. I think that AI will be an Iron Man suit and it will help us solve a lot of the problems we would like to solve. And so I would kind of venture into this with kind of like an abundance mindset versus a scarcity. I think entrepreneurship is, at its core, the ability to find somebody you'd like to serve and come up with a problem come up with a solution to a problem and have a scalable way of solving that. And then obviously monetizing that. And I do think that a lot of entrepreneurs, they do this, of course, because they want to make money, but they also do it because they are excited about finding ways of solving problems. And so I would hope that AI can kind of reinvent what entrepreneurship is so that we can have the unicorns, that's fine. But these 60% of Americans who say they'd like to start something, the reality is that only 8% does. And most of us are very proud of the backbone of entrepreneurship, which is the mom and pop stores, which is like this everyday entrepreneurship. And that has kind of been forgotten for a while. And so I would hope that over the next 10 years, you'll see many more people that have the ability and now the capabilities to go out and solve a problem for somebody they care about and make money while doing that.
I love that vision. It should make company formation and ideation and pursuing your dreams easier, not harder. And I love that you went there. It's not about, whatever state the technology will be in, it's the state that the human will be in because of the technology.
100%.
Beautiful. Henrik, this one's been wonderful. I was looking forward to it. You didn't disappoint. Please take me up on the offer. Come back and hang out on the podcast sometime again soon, all right?
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Good. Where can the audience learn more about you and the book and Prehype and the great stuff you're doing?
I am pretty active on LinkedIn, so Henrik Werdelin on LinkedIn is probably a good place to find out what I'm up to, and then try a new entrepreneurial platform, audos.com, and the book is available, Me, My Customer, and AI, on Amazon and where else you buy books.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, that's the great Henrik Werdelin. And gosh, that is all the time we have for this week on AI and the future of work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from People Rain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.
Yo, it's the end of the show, time to power it down. AI's the sis, but humans wear the crown. Team Human in the house, got the vibe so clever. Dan Turchin from People Rain, making us better. We learned about AI for humans. We're ready to conquer the future, that's all for now. See you next time.